Land Rover's Discovery Sport has evolved considerably in this updated form, with huge engineering changes and a completely fresh interior. It remains a go-to choice if you're seeking a premium badged model in the mid-size 7-seat SUV segment, or if you want an SUV of this kind that can go where others fear to tread.
You hesitate to think of where Land Rover might be now without the Discovery Sport. It's one of the key models that's kept JLR going over the last 5 years, and in the current climate, this car needs to pull its weight in the showroom more than ever, which is a big ask, given that since the original launch in 2014, a whole range of direct rivals have sprung up. So Land Rover has set out to take the lead once more in this class. This updated model, launched in late 2019, might look a little different from its predecessor, but in many ways it's a completely fresh package, as we're going to see in this film. But let's take a step back before we get into all that and talk about what this product's supposed to be, in case you're not familiar with it. Now, the name might suggest a sportier version of the brand's full-fat Discovery large SUV. Instead, this is very much a separate, smaller model whose sport moniker is intended to designate the kind of active lifestyle that likely owners will probably lead, rather than suggesting a particularly dynamic handling demeanour. Those potential buyers will usually be those with larger families who can't or don't want to stretch to a big Disco or Range Rover model. People typically frequenting the market for mid-sized 7-seat crossovers like Kia Sorento, Volkswagen's Tiguan Allspace, Skoda's Kodiaq and Hyundai Santa Fe. It's certainly a vital car for the brand. No model in Land Rover's history has sold better than the Discovery Sport, which was crucial in the 2016 to 2017 period, which saw its Jaguar Land Rover parent group make massive losses in the wake of a downturn in diesel sales and public uncertainty over Brexit. More recently, things in Solihull have begun to look a little rosier as the JLR conglomerate's £2.5 billion Charge and Accelerate turnaround plan has begun to take effect, and this rejuvenated Discovery Sport is very much a part of that. Now, pretty much only the exterior styling and the entry-level diesel engine are carried over from the original model. Otherwise, everything is different here. Even the platform this car sits on, the PTA or Premium Transverse Architecture front structure that we've already seen in the second generation Range Rover Evoque. Now here, as with the Range Rover Evoque, this more sophisticated chassis has enabled the fitment of a whole range of mild hybrid petrol and diesel engines, plus a PHEV plug-in hybrid too. There's also an all-new cabin with greater seat folding flexibility and upgraded media connectivity, plus there's stronger standards of safety and even greater off-road ability should you need that. Now that all sounds quite promising, doesn't it? Land Rover really needs this car to be good, but is it? Well, let's put this Discovery Sport to the test. This improved Discovery Sport features some fundamentally different engineering in terms of its fresh platform and its mild hybrid tech, but it's not the kind of thing that's likely to change the dynamic character of this SUV, nor should it. Set off and this car feels exactly as any Land Rover of this kind should, with a high-set driving position and a relaxed, loping demeanour. Refinement is excellent. It's even better in this revised model thanks to the 10% greater rigidity of the structure and to revisions to the engine and the subframe mountings. What hasn't changed is that this car isn't actually quite as compact as it first appears. The facts are that it's both longer and wider than the original first generation Range Rover, and that is something that you particularly realise in urban parking situations. Despite that though, on the move it is a vehicle that's easy to place with confidence through the turns. In fact, Land Rover's success in finessing both ride and handling is probably one of the things that we've been most impressed by here. This car is never going to be quite as sharp to drive as rivals from BMW, Audi and Volvo, but then those contenders have much less ground clearance and few aspirations towards off-road prowess. As we'll see in a minute though, the Discovery Sport does, and given that, the extent of its road-going repertoire is wider than it really has any right to be, especially in this case of this revised model. We'd certainly say that it easily matches the kind of drive dynamics you'd find in closer 7-seat mid-sized SUV rivals like Volkswagen's Tiguan Allspace or the Mercedes GLB. Much of the reason why centres around the steering. It's leisurely geared, but somehow it still inspires confidence thanks to an alert and natural feeling setup that provides for the kind of precise and accurate corner turning that allows you to make good use of the torque vectoring by braking system. Now this is one of those that quells understeer through a sharp corner, lightly braking the outside front wheels in a way that subtly tightens your line and maximises traction. It all means that you can get into a real driving flow with this car, aided by a suspension setup that gets better the faster you go. It's a specially developed rear multi-link system that's particularly good at dealing with undulating surfaces through quick flowing curves, although it's less impressive over the terrible tarmac that characterises our inner cities. Which is why, on the school run, you may well feel that this Discovery Sport to be living up to its name with a greater level of firmness than some other rivals deliver. Still, maybe that is the price you pay for the way that on the open road, body roll at speed through the bends is kept reasonably well in check, which, if you find yourself running a bit late, will allow you to make the most of the fact that there is actually a surprising amount of grip for an SUV weighing nearly 2 tons. Ah yes, weight. Now, as with other JLR products we've tried of late, that is the elephant in the room here. You'd think the adoption of this revised model's new PTA, Premium Transverse Architecture chassis, would have helped here, but not a bit of it. Unlike the aluminium structure that's used by the JLR Jaguar equivalent to this car, the F-Pace, the PTA platform is fashioned from clunky old steel, which partly explains why this Land Rover is significantly heavier than a bigger Range Rover Velar and tips the scales at quite a lot more than its direct segment contemporaries. Comparable versions of its closest sector rival, the Mercedes GLB, are nearly 300 kilos lighter, and even a much older design like Skoda's Kodiaq is around 130 kilos lighter in equivalent form. None of that does much to help this car's efficiency prospects. We'll get to that later in this film, and it explains why none of the engines on offer feel quite as rapid as you expect them to. We had hoped that the mild hybrid 48-volt MHEV technology that virtually all of them now feature might have helped here. One of the trumpeted selling points of this technology is supposed to be the way that it can provide a little electric boost from low revs to torque fill while you're waiting for the turbo to spool up. In theory, up to 140 newton meters of extra torque is supposed to be available from the little lithium-ion battery that the system secretes beneath the rear seat, so helping acceleration from low speeds. In practice, though, we've found it difficult to detect any advantage of that sort in real-world driving. Land Rover talks of a new engine range here, but in some ways that is a touch misleading. The petrol and diesel Ingenium power plants in question are basically the same as they were before, but with a bit of electrified tinsel in the form of an engine-mounted belt-integrated starter, which harvests energy while decelerating. Go for the least expensive D150 manual diesel model, and you don't even get that, which does make it a touch ironic that this variant is the cleanest and the most frugal derivative in the range. Rest to 62 takes 10.8 seconds en route to 120 miles an hour if you're interested, but as a potential Discovery Sport buyer, you probably won't be, because you can't have that entry-level D150 manual package with the things that you're most likely to want in this model: 7 seats, all-wheel drive and automatic transmission. All of which means that you can safely forget about that base version and focus instead on the part electrified models that make up the rest of the lineup, all of which are 7-seat variants with all-wheel drive and Land Rover's familiar 9-speed ZF Auto gearbox. As usual with JLR products, the model numbering designates horsepower, and for the reasons that we gave earlier, the MHEV version of the D150 diesel unit doesn't seem to have quite enough of it, despite its quoted 380 Nm torque figure. That ordinarily ought to be enough to propel a car of this size along with reasonable alacrity. If you won't habitually be using your Disco Sport very often over long trips or when fully loaded, that may not matter too much. The performance stats stats for a D150 Auto see 62 reached in 11.1 seconds on the way to 117 miles an hour. A better all-round choice, if you can stretch to it, would be the D180 version of the same engine, which has 430 Nm of pulling power and consequently enhances those performance stats to 9.4 seconds and 125 miles an hour. Here we've gone further and we're trying the twin-turbo D240 diesel, which has 500 Nm of grunt and improves those figures further to 7.4 seconds and 136 mph. In truth, this top diesel unit doesn't feel anything like that fast. The weight issue is exacerbated by the gearbox's reluctance to shift down as quickly as you might want when a rapid burst of speed's called for. With the slightly lighter petrol models, you notice that sort of thing rather less, but here the gearbox can be rather too eager to change down and fire the revs towards the 6,500 RPM red line, which won't really facilitate quiet or luxuriously rapid progress if you have deadlines to meet. Should you want a petrol version of this car, we'd probably counsel against the base P200 model unless you'll merely be using it for short hops, because as with the base diesel, there isn't really quite enough torque to shift a car of this weight along with much rapidity. You wouldn't necessarily know that from this variant stats though. Rest to 62 in 8.6 seconds on the way to 128 miles an hour. For mixed motoring in a conventional petrol version of this car, you'd be better off with a top P250 version. That improves those figures to 7.3 seconds and 139 miles an hour. As we'll observe further in our cost of ownership section, both these 2-litre mild hybrid petrol engines rather like a drink, which if you're set on fueling from the green pump might tempt you towards the alternative plug-in hybrid variant that you can ask your dealer about. Now here, the engine in question is properly new from the ground up, rather than merely being an older power plant that's been embellished with a fashionable bit of battery tech. With a Discovery Sport PHEV, as with the equivalent version of the Range Rover Evoque, you get a 3-cylinder 1.5 litre petrol unit putting out 197 HP and boosted with a 107 horsepower electric motor. You might conceivably be put off by the asking price, but otherwise, in our view, it's a hugely better proposition than the conventional petrol units. The PHEV package does add on a few kilograms though, and slightly nullifies the way that the lighter petrol Discovery Sport turns into corners with a touch more eagerness than the diesel versions. The all-wheel drive system that's used in most models uses an efficient driveline setup that works like most other 4x4 packages in this segment, employing a driveline disconnect system that cuts out the prop shaft and the rear axle when they're not required, and which will leave you at the wheel of a front-driven Discovery Sport for most of the time. For this top D240 diesel variant though, Land Rover fits a GKN developed active driveline, which uses a clever twin multiplate clutch to manage torque and wheel spin across the back wheels, maximising traction when you're cornering at speed. It's basically a more sophisticated version of the torque management by braking system, which, as I mentioned earlier, is retained for the front wheels on all Discovery Sports. Every model can also, on request, be fitted with optional adaptive dynamics, adaptive damping, which can be paired with configurable dynamics, a screen option that enables you to tailor the handling of your car to suit your precise preferences. But other mid-sized SUVs will serve you better if you're determined to drive on your door handles. None in this segment though can tow better. The two top diesel units can tug along up to 2.5 tons, and they can be embellished with a special advanced tow assist setup for easy reversing when you're hitched up. And no rival can hold a candle to this Land Rover off the beaten track. Now let's be clear, if you're shopping in this sector and you think a car of this kind is pretty pointless if it can't go very far off-road, then you absolutely have to buy this one. It's as simple as that. It doesn't of course get the air suspension that lifts a larger full-fat Discovery loftily away from terra firma, but that kind of complexity really isn't needed at this price point. In any case, this Discovery Sport's 212mm of ground clearance is already vastly better than the competition, and it facilitates a 600mm wading capability. To give you some perspective, a Mercedes GLC can only wade through 300 mils of water, and somewhat unbelievably, a Skoda Kodiaq is only rated to 180 mils. All of which makes this Land Rover's fording prowess more significant than its impressive quoted approach and departure angle figures, 25 degrees at the front and 30.2 degrees at the rear. After all, although you wouldn't want to cross the Serengeti in this car, you might very well come across a deep winter flood. What's so impressive about the Discovery Sport's off-piste capability is how easy it is to use, thanks primarily to Land Rover's much-admired terrain response system. This has settings for on-road use too, eco and comfort, plus an extra dynamic mode if you fitted the optional Adaptive Dynamics variable damping package. But where it really shines is off the beaten track, where you can select specific grass, gravel, snow, mud and ruts, and sand options to suit the land that you're driving over. Our only previous criticism of this setup in the old model was the lack of a set and forget auto setting, but even that's been addressed now with the improved Terrain Response 2 package that features here. Once you've made your selection from the various modes, it's really just a case of leaving the car's electronics to work out how best to dole out power and maximize traction. It sniffs out grip where really none seems to exist, and it turns the Discovery Sport into an impressively capable all-road driving machine. There's a ramp breakover angle of 20.6 degrees and daunting gradients of up to 45 degrees can be tackled. In short, try to approach what this car can do in extremis at the wheel of any other mid-sized SUV in this sector and you'd damage the thing, and probably you'd be lucky not to disable it. And there's more too. All Discovery Sport variants get the same hill launch assist and hill descent control systems that you'll find on larger Range Rover models. Plus there's a low traction launch feature. Now that will help you pull away smoothly from a standstill on very slippery surfaces. And there's what's called all-terrain progress control too, essentially a kind of low-speed cruise control that helps you to maintain steady progress in extreme off-road conditions. All the while, graphics in the instrument display brief you on things like steering wheel angles and driveline torque distribution. If you are planning to use much of this capability, even occasionally, then we would recommend a further investment in the optional ground sight clear view forward camera system. That's a so-called transparent bonnet setup that allows you to easily identify potentially damaging rocks and tree roots that you might be just about to drive over. This neat package uses a combined feed from cameras in the grille and beneath the mirrors to bring up a digital field of vision on the central infotainment screen, some 15 meters across and 8.5 meters deep. Your front wheels are ghosted into the display to help you place the car. But of course, most likely owners won't really require any of this sort of prowess. For them, the Discovery Sport will continue to be a fashionable family workhorse with capability in reserve for the few times it will be needed. What's magnificent about this car, though, in comparison to its rivals, is that when those times occur, say when you venture from your front door to discover the world covered by a thick blanket of snow, there's this satisfying feeling of having a product that's in its element. It's a bit like having a supercar and finding yourself at a racetrack. Outside of a Land Rover showroom, really no other mid-sized SUV can deliver that, which is why no other car of this kind is quite like the Discovery Sport. Product differentiation is everything in the current market, and it's especially important to Land Rover. Now, the Solihull brand has the difficult task of trying to make its leisure-orientated Discovery Sport and Discovery models stylish enough to compete with other premium brands, yet not so fashionable that its cars trample on territory set aside for the company's trendier, more luxury-orientated Range Rover models. Given that remit, it's difficult to fault what's been achieved with this Discovery Sport, which in this enhanced form looks at first glance identical to the original design, but which has actually been improved with some subtle aesthetic updates. Now, the core visual appeal of this car hasn't changed though. It's still clearly a Land Rover. The clamshell bonnet and the distinctive two-bar grille, they are brand staples which blend with the functional, practical and reasonably rugged look. At the same time though, as before, this car manages to avoid the rather clunky SUV-style pavement presence that you will find with some segment rivals. The styling is instead suggestive of something nimble, compact, upmarket and smoothly aerodynamic. The smart front end helps here with sleek wraparound corners that reduce the visual bulk of the front overhang and are embellished by careful little touches of design. These vertical corner cutouts, for example, they're a fresh addition that comes courtesy of this revised model's restyled bumper. It has a different look depending on whether you order your car in this standard form or with the R Dynamic pack, which is available with all trim levels. The lightly revised grille, which features across the lineup, gets Shadow Atlas finishing and a gloss black surround on the R Dynamic models. As for the headlamps that flank it, well, they are different with this updated car too. They now feature full LED beams as standard. Plusher models get these lamps with a more distinctive premium daytime running light signature, and across the range you can add in more sophisticated matrix LED technology if you want that. As before, the most distinctive profile feature is this substantial C-pillar that rakes dramatically forward and stops just short of the gloss black window surrounds, allowing for an optional contrasting roof colour to suit those that want that. With the original version, this model, designer Jerry McGovern and his team also worked a lot of shape into the flanks here with a horizontal blade-like mid-level feature line that flows from this distinctive front fender vent and sweeps backwards along the bodywork. Add in a dynamic sill crease and strong wheel arches and you have a car with a genuinely athletic stance. Wheel sizes mostly vary between 17 and 20 inches. We've got the 20-inch diamond turned 5 split spoke rims here, but as part of the update changes, Land Rover has also introduced an even larger 21-inch size for those really wanting to make a street side statement. Move around to the back and there's a subtle roof spoiler and a silver skid plate with twin exhaust outlets on the left hand side. That sits below this beautifully detailed pair of light units which are split by the tailgate opening and which now feature full LED illumination. What's more significant though is what you can't see. Now Land Rover is keen to talk about this improved model's PTA, Premium Transverse Architecture platform, which has made the body 33% stiffer than before and makes possible the installation of the brand's fresh, mild hybrid engine range. We are a touch disappointed though that this predominantly steel structure adds so much weight to this SUV. A car like this one, which is not much larger than a Ford Focus, should never weigh nearly 2 tons. Model for model, its curb weight is actually 49 kilos heavier than the much larger Range Rover Velar, which benefits from the aluminium platform that we'd like to have seen installed here. Time to take a seat at the wheel. Now before we do, let's reference an element of fresh technology that we really like that's now been made available to Discovery Sport buyers. Avoid entry-level trim and this Land Rover will come equipped with the brand's super clever smart settings system, which uses artificial intelligence algorithms to learn your driving preferences. So things like seat positions plus music and climate settings, which adjust themselves as you operate this redesigned key fob when you approach the car. Time to take a seat up front in the so-called Sports Command driving position, a pleasant perch that positions you a little higher than you would be in most rivals. And it's a position from which you realise just how far Land Rover design has come in recent years. Now, there were lots of things that you could say about the original model's interior, but one thing was always certain. It never made you feel like you were in a fully fledged Range Rover or even a full-fat Discovery. Specified correctly, this cabin might do. Now, if you come to this car seeking differentiation from the original, this is where you're going to find it. Now, if you've owned or you've frequently driven a Discovery Sport before, you will notice the key changes immediately. The replacement of the past its sell-by-date circular gear selector by this pistol grip F-type sports car derived shifter, the much wider centre console between the seats, the far classier 4-spoke multifunction stitched steering wheel with these capacitive switches, and a much higher standard of fit and finish, which is now properly reflective of this car's premium brand status. The overall theme, though, remains based around logic rather than luxury, and that's an approach that might at first seem a little less luxurious than that championed by this model's German rivals. But then that's appropriate. This car is, after all, more family and activity orientated. What did need to more exactly match the competition was a more class competitive level of cabin media provision, and that has been delivered by the way that this car, like other recent JLR models, gets the company's Panasonic developed Touch Pro infotainment screen setup. Now actually it's not quite the same system that you'll find in pricier Land Rover and Jaguar products. They use a twin screen setup on the centre stack. Here there's just a single upper 10.25-inch display which, as in the Evoque, sits below a slim pair of relocated centre vents. Lower down, where on a Range Rover model the second monitor would be, there's a piano black trimmed panel decorated with touch sensitive buttons. Plus you get these two chunky dials, and they adjust temperature in their normal position setting, but they're also multifunctional. Push them in and they adjust the seat heaters. Press this button on the passenger side one and you'll tweak the fan speed. Press this button on the driver's side one and you can adjust the chosen terrain response drive modes. Is all of this a big improvement? Well, absolutely, both in functionality and visual appeal. If you own the previous version of this model with its rubberized switchgear and constricted 8-inch upper central display, it'll seem like a generational change has been made, especially now that Land Rover has given in to customer pressure and incorporated Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring into the whole package. Most models also come with an online pack that adds a 4G Wi-Fi hotspot and a web browser. Overall, we love this monitor's graphic definition, but we would ideally have preferred to be able to operate it via the kind of lower rotary controller that BMW provides, rather than continually having to jab away at the touchscreen. There is also the issue that the voice control functionality, that's nothing like as intuitive as that which is provided by the German premium brands, and the touch sensitive controls on the ventilation panel are sometimes difficult to use on the move because they lack haptic feedback. Anything the Touch Pro setup can't tell you will almost certainly be covered off by the instruments that you view through this imposing Range Rover style wheel, which, as here, can be trimmed in a lovely suede cloth, and above which you can also have an optional head-up display projecting key commands onto the bottom of the windscreen. Higher-end Discovery Sport models like this one now feature the kind of all-digital instrument binnacle display that's been a design feature on larger Land Rover products for some time. This 12.3-inch interactive driver display isn't quite as intuitive as, say, the virtual cockpit setup you'll find in a rival Audi, but there are a lot of configurable options controlled by touch-sensitive switches on the wheel. Now, these allow you to view either one or two dials, together with formats that prioritise either navigation, trip computer, media or off-road setting info alongside them. Or you can fill the binnacle screen with a full map layout. It's up to you. As for cabin quality, well, cheaper hidden plastics are in evidence if you really search for them, but broadly what's on offer here is, as we've already suggested, now far more befitting of the premium class standard, and build quality from the Merseyside factory, which was questioned in the past by customer satisfaction surveys, now seems pretty strong. The seats are good too, with heating plus upholstery that has a memory foam-like ability to mould itself to your body shape. Avoid entry-level trim and you get two trimming options. Now, we rather like the ebony LuxTech upholstery we have here, which features a suede cloth finish fashioned from 53 recycled bottles worth of plastic per Discovery Sport. You might feel rather guilty about specifying ordinary leather after considering that, but it is there if you want it as a no-cost option. If you really want to spoil yourself, though, you'll choose the softer Windsor leather that Land Rover fits to top variants, and you'll be pleased to find that a seat massaging feature as an option has been added for the first time. What else? Well, there's not much wrong with the general ergonomics, although the driver's footwell is a little awkwardly shaped, and that makes it a bit difficult to find a comfortable position for your left foot. These chunky door mirrors offer a good view rearwards, but they can sometimes obstruct your forward visibility at junctions. Rearward visibility is slightly limited by the angled C-pillar and by the rather narrow rear window, and that makes essential the standard rear parking sensors and rear view camera. Neither of those features will help very much with rear vision at ordinary road speeds, of course, but for a little extra, Land Rover can sell you a feature that does. Let's say you're carrying bulky luggage or lanky passengers which obscure your view out back. Now, with this clear sight feature fitted to the rear view mirror, you can simply click the mirror surface into a roof camera fed widescreen 50-degree view of the road behind. Equally neat is another option, the ground sight clear view forward camera system, which uses cameras below the front bumper to show an image of what is underneath the front end of the car on the central Touch Pro screen. That's very handy when you're off-roading or parking in tight spaces. Interior stowage space, previously something of an issue for Discovery Sport buyers, has been much improved with this updated model, thanks to a larger central cubby box, redesigned cup holders and larger door bins, which now have mouldings each able to hold a 750ml bottle. Small item storage in the cabin is up by 25% to 48 litres, although some segment rivals do still offer more. The central box between the seats we just mentioned is now 7.3 litres in size. If you take out this front removable cup holder tray, it's simply enormous. Plus, it incorporates plenty of charging options thanks to the provision of a micro SIM slot, a 12-volt port and twin USBs. Actually, up to 8 USB ports can feature around the interior of this car, and up to 3 12-volt sockets. Plus, for the first time, Discovery Sport buyers can specify a wireless charging mat. It all means that there'll be no excuse for flat phone batteries or family gripes about media connectivity. Continuing on the theme of cabin storage, the inner lid of this central box has ticket clips, and there'll be an overhead compartment for your sunglasses, even if, as here, you have the panoramic glass roof fitted. You don't get the storage area behind the central stack that features in the Evoque, but at the base of the centre console there's a deep compartment with a USB port nearby. The glove box, which has an incorporated pen clip, is also decently sized, and it has an elasticated strap at the back. Okay, time to move rearwards and experience this car from a passenger perspective. Prior to this model's original launch back in 2014, family SUVs with space for 3 rows of seats looked boxy and boring. The Discovery Sport proved that a car of this kind could be different, offering this relatively sleek silhouette that disguises the car's size really well. It is shorter than class contemporaries that can take only 5 people, cars like the Audi Q5 and the Lexus NX, but this Land Rover can accommodate up to 7, which we find particularly impressive. Now, we'll get to the rearmost pews in just a minute, but first let's try the second row bench that you'll be using far more often. Comfort here is much enhanced by the way that this second row's so-called stadium seating is slightly raised by 50mm, giving occupants a better view out. In terms of stretching out space, you really appreciate the extra 60mm of wheelbase that this car enjoys over its Range Rover Evoque stablemate, something further aided by these cutouts in the backs of the front seats that free up even more room for your knees. The backrest reclines too. If you need more stretching out room, then the seat base can be slid backwards and forwards by up to 160mm. This creates as much as 112mm of knee room and 1011mm of leg room, which could make this rear seat almost as accommodating as that in a Range Rover. Unfortunately, although the seat back split here is 40-20-40, the seats only slide and recline in a 60-40 configuration. Headroom is class competitive, although it is reduced by a few millimetres if you specify the glass panoramic roof we mentioned earlier, which floods the cabin with light if you retract the electric blind. And there are 3 proper seating positions here, although the middle one is inevitably a little thinner than the outer two. Still, at least when it's being used, you don't have to splay your feet around a prominent central transmission tunnel. Despite the four-wheel drive system, this one here is fairly low set. Most of the time, of course, there'll be only a couple of folk back here, and they'll be able to use this central armrest, which incorporates a couple of cup holders. The doors have deep bins, plus there are seat back pockets, overhead coat hooks, and press-on reading lights. Plus, there's a center console here with twin vents, a small storage cubby, and a 12-volt socket. There's no option for a separate climate control zone back here, though. As we said earlier, you can add more media points if you need them. Isofix child seat fastenings feature as usual for the outer two positions. Okay, what about the third row seating? Well, it's part of the standard 5+2 seating package for this car, only if you avoid entry-level trim, but where it's fitted, it gives this car an important advantage over 5-seat only key segment competitors like BMW's X3, Audi's Q5 and the Mercedes GLC. As with other mid-sized 7-seat SUVs, you'll have to manage your expectations here. These pews are for children and occasional adult use only. In a car just 4.6 meters in length, they could never be anything but. Still, in getting to them, it does help that the door opens widely to 90 degrees for easy access. Pull this lever on the outer middle row seat shoulder and it springs forward in one easy motion to open up a route to the very back. Although you will still need to be reasonably athletic to use it. I mean, Grandma's certainly not going to want to clamber in here for her Sunday afternoon trip to the garden centre. This middle row bench doesn't return to its original position automatically after you've pulled it forward. Instead, it remains set further forward so as to maximise third row leg space. Which you're going to need if, as an adult, you're unfortunate enough to be stuck back here for any length of time. To be fair, in terms of legroom, providing you can convince those ahead of you to push forward the middle bench quite a lot, you won't fare much worse here than you would in an obvious rival. But in this case, things really aren't helped by particularly restricted headroom and the way that the shallow footwell forces your knees up towards your head. Land Rover, of course, will tell you that all that doesn't matter very much because these seats are really only intended for children, to which we'd respond by saying, well, if that's the case, then why are Isofix child seat fastenings not fitted here? To be fair, most rivals also fail to provide that feature. You get these pull-up headrests so your neck is supported okay, but these tiny seat bases offer woeful levels of thigh support for an adult. Floor-mounted cup holders are provided and the left-hand side passenger will have access to a 12-volt socket. At least it doesn't feel too claustrophobic thanks to these rear quarter-light windows. Okay, let's finish with a look at boot space. Before we open the tailgate, here's a nice touch. This optional activity key, a waterproof, shockproof wristband with an integrated transponder. Now, when you're wearing it, you can lock the key in the car and remove the anxiety of losing it. And when you return from rock climbing or canoeing or mountain biking or whatever it is, all you do is hold the wristband near to the boot badge, and it opens the tailgate so you can access the ordinary key fob where it'll have been safely stowed away. The activity key doesn't have a battery, so it'll never run out of power. Avoid the two entry trim levels and you get this powered rear hatch, which a bit surprisingly can't be specified with gesture control. If once it raises you find yourself facing a cabin with all 3 seating rows in place, you won't be surprised to find that luggage space is tiny, 115 litres in size. There is storage space underneath the floor, but it's almost entirely taken up with things like the jack and the repair kit. Annoyingly, to get any kind of spare wheel, you have to pay extra. Unfortunately, there's no space under there to store the retracted tonneau cover when that's not in use, so when the third row is up, there's a faff of having to store that in your garage. Of course, most of the time you won't need space for 7 folks, so you'll be pulling on these straps and releasing these rearmost pews into the floor. at which point a very decent cargo capacity space is freed up. Now Land Rover quotes this at 840 litres. That's a figure that sounds huge until you realise the brand's inflated it by quoting to roof height. Other makers quote to the height of the parcel shelf. Do that here, it'd be more like 500 litres. Now that is class competitive, although rivals like Audi's Q5, Hyundai Santa Fe and Peugeot's 5008 all provide more. Either way, it's a very usable space, 785 mils high and 1323 mils wide. That's a figure that narrows to 1107 mils between the wheel arches. This is thanks to this car's very compact multi-link rear axle, which frees up space for the fold-out third row seating and ensures that the rear suspension turrets make minimal intrusion into the luggage area. 8 carry-on suitcases will fit in here. To give you some class perspective, you could fit 9 into an Audi Q5. Getting awkward loads in is aided by a boot lip that sits flush with the boot floor, and by the way that the second row seats can slide forward. Plus, those seat backs can be made a touch more vertical if necessary, and that can make all the difference when it comes to getting awkwardly sized cases on in airport runs. The fact that, as I mentioned earlier, the second row seat back is now split 40-20-40 rather than as before just 60-40 is useful because it means that longer items like skis can now be slid in between a couple of rear seated folk. Bag hooks are missing, but there are the usual 4 silver tie down points, plus you get an elasticated strap on the cargo wall on both sides and the netted compartment on the right there. Now if you specified the retractable tow hitch, the buttons for that will be here on the left near the provided 12-volt socket. More buttons feature on the right, those are for the retraction of the second row backrest. Use these buttons and the second row seat backs spring forward, although a bit annoyingly you have to go around and manually complete the process so they sit completely flat on the floor. In this configuration there's 1451 litres of dry space or 1574 if you happen to have a 5-seat version of this car. Unfortunately there's no option to specify a fold flat front passenger seat and go even further. Still, the total capacity you do get is 68 litres greater than the Evoque can offer. This is almost the least expensive Land Rover product that you can buy, but that doesn't mean that you could call it especially affordable. Now there is a rather false starting point to the Discovery Sport range in the form of a base D150 diesel model with front wheel drive, manual transmission, only 5 seats and an engine which, unlike every other power plant in the range, lacks mild hybrid technology. Now in the unlikely event that you want your Discovery Sport in such a form, you'll be looking at prices which from the launch of this revised model would see you paying from around £32,000. Every other model in the range comes with the brand's 5+2 7-seat configuration, although a 5-seater format is a no-cost option, plus all-wheel drive, automatic transmission and the Solihull brand's latest mild hybrid tech. Now assuming that is your starting point in perusing the lineup, then you'll find yourself looking at prices which from launch were pitched from just under £37,000. But of course they'll shoot up from there depending on engine choice and your selection between 4 trim options. There is a base spec level simply called Discovery Sport, which is only available with the entry-level petrol and diesel engines, but you probably won't want that, and that will leave you perusing between the 3 core trims. Most customers will choose between either the S variants or the kind of SE derivative that we have here. That'll leave them typically paying in the £40,000 to £45,000 bracket. For those with deeper pockets who can stretch to either the top 2 diesel engines or the top petrol unit, there's a further plush HSE derivative. Another incentive to choose between the S, SE or HSE trim levels is that with each one, your dealer will offer you the £1,500 option of upgrading to the brand's popular R-Dynamic styling pack that'll give your Discovery Sport a more purposeful look. Now in this case, that means restyled bumpers and a smarter alloy wheel style, plus special bonnet and tailgate script and a front grille with Shadow Atlas finishing and a gloss black surround. Inside, the R-Dynamic pack gives you ebony trimmed seats with red stitching, titanium mesh trim finishing, black gear shift paddles and branded metal tread plates. We've been talking about engines. A few brief words are in order regarding the range structure concerning those. Now, earlier in this section, we referenced the quite substantial price jump, nearly £5,000, which buyers of the base D150 diesel model will have to pay if they want to progress from the base front-driven, manual, non-mild hybrid model to the same car with all-wheel drive, an auto gearbox and mild hybrid tech, which takes you to the starting point of close to £37,000 that we alluded to earlier. And that's a figure that, if you don't want a diesel, would alternatively get you the base P200 200 horsepower petrol model. If you want Land Rover's 2-litre Ingenium diesel engine in 180 horsepower D180 form, the sticker figures from launch started from just over £40,000, so around £4,000 more than an equivalent D150. Seems like a big price hike for a software tweak. There's a twin-turbo D240 engine above that, starting from close to £43,000. That's a power plant we've been testing here. For the few who'll want the top petrol engine used in the 250 horsepower P250 models, prices from launch started from just under £42,000. In terms of where this Discovery Sport fits into Land Rover's range, well, we've already said that it's similarly priced to an Evoque, but that car appeals to a completely different SUV demographic, which to some extent also applies to the two other possible products from the Solihull maker that a potential Discovery Sport buyer might be tempted to consider. We have the new Defender, which in 7-seat 110 form costs from around £45,000, and the full-fat Discovery large SUV, which starts from around £48,000. What about rivals to this car from other brands? Well, historically, the Disco Sport's major selling point was always that it was the only mid-sized 7-seat SUV you could buy with a posh premium badge. Now Mercedes has entered this segment with their GLB model. That's no longer true, but actually, once you peruse the price lists, it becomes clear that there is rather less of a crossover between these two products than you might think. Land Rover's refusal to offer front-wheel drive with automatic transmission in this car makes the two products a little difficult to directly price compare. In fact, the only variant in the GLB range which is really directly comparable to a Discovery Sport is the GLB 200D 4MATIC model, which has to be had with plush AMG line premium trim, and which in 7-seat form at the time of this test cost around £41,500. To give you some perspective there, it's around £1,000 less than a slightly less well-spec'd Discovery Sport D150 SE model. Of course, if you come in search of a mid-sized 7-seat SUV and you're not fussed about having a premium badge on the bonnet, then your alternative choices widen considerably. Three of the most obvious ones lie with the trio of Volkswagen Group products which share the same MQB-A platform, the Skoda Kodiaq, the Seat Tarraco and the VW Tiguan Allspace. Now, assuming you want the same sort of formula that most Discovery Sport buyers will be looking at, i.e. diesel power, automatic transmission, 7 seats and all-wheel drive, then you'll find that the VW would cost you much the same as the Disco Sport, but you could expect to save a couple of thousand if you chose an equivalent Seat Tarraco, and the saving might be up to £4,000 or more if you chose an equivalent Skoda Kodiaq. What are your alternatives in this segment outside of Volkswagen Group models? Well, it's possible that you might be considering the Korean contingent in this segment, Kia Sorento and Hyundai Santa Fe. Neither is as cheap as you might think. You're looking at the best part of £40,000 for both of those versions with auto transmission, 7 seats and a decent spec. So again, not much of a saving over this Land Rover. Other potential mid-sized 7-seat SUV rivals are slightly more tenuous. You could easily spend £30,000 to £35,000 on a Peugeot 5008 or a 7-seat Honda CR-V, but neither is really directly comparable to this Disco Sport because the Peugeot can't be had with all-wheel drive and the Honda can't be had with the diesel engine. An equivalent Nissan X-Trail might offer quite a saving, but it doesn't really have the quality feel a potential Land Rover buyer would be looking for. The same would also apply to the Mitsubishi Outlander and the SsangYong Rexton. Beyond that, your only options lie with all the 5-seat only mid-sized premium SUVs that sit in the £30,000 to £45,000 bracket, primarily BMW's X3, Mercedes GLC, the Audi Q5, the Volvo XC60, Alfa Romeo Stelvio, the Lexus NX, and the car that shares this one's engine, the Jaguar F-Pace. But if you were considering those and you wanted a Land Rover product, you'd probably be more attracted by either a Range Rover Evoque or a Range Rover Velar. Enough with comparisons. Basically, if you need a mid-sized SUV with 7 seats, a posh badge and real capability, there's still not much to touch this Discovery Sport. And if you've come to that conclusion and you want one, then the deal might be sealed Land Rover's way by a decently generous level of spec. Is that what's offered here? Let's see. There is actually a reasonable amount provided as standard, even if you opt for entry-level trim. That means 17-inch alloy wheels, full LED headlights, auto headlamps and wipers, a heated windscreen and a volumetric alarm. And inside, features like automatic 2-zone climate control, ambient lighting, cruise control and a 40-20-40 split rear bench, plus heated front seats that are 8-way manually adjustable. You also get all-round parking sensors and a rear view camera. In addition, all Discovery Sports now include the brand's 10.25-inch screen Touch Pro infotainment system. This setup incorporates a 6-speaker DAB sound system, all your needed connection sockets, Bluetooth phone connectivity and a smartphone pack which enables Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring. The package also includes what Land Rover calls In Control Protect, and that's a system which will automatically call the emergency services with your exact GPS location if the airbags activate in an accident. Plus, it gives you downloadable remote app functionality, and that can show you the location of your vehicle, update you on its fuel and fluid levels, tell you if the windows have been left open, and allows you to download journey information too. You are reminded of the sheer capability of this car with the news that all all-wheel drive variants get Land Rover's optimum suite of off-road driving tools, a terrain response 2 package that allows you via various selectable modes to set the car up to suit the ground that you're traversing. Plus there's a low traction launch setup, hill launch assist, hill descent control and all-terrain progress control, a kind of off-road cruise control. Given the off-piste capability that all this creates, it is a little disappointing to find that you do have to pay extra for a space-saver spare wheel. Still, there are a few other key equipment omissions, so even with the least expensive Discovery Sport trim level, you get a specification that reasonably well befits a car wearing the luxury Land Rover badge. As suggested earlier though, you'll probably want more and you'll find yourself choosing between the S, SE and HSE grades, which account for the vast majority of sales. S-Spec adds larger 18-inch wheels, power folding mirrors, the driver's side auto dims too, rear animated directional indicators and an adaptive speed limiter which can set itself to prevailing speed limits courtesy of traffic sign recognition. Inside, in an S-Spec variant, you'll get seats trimmed in your choice of either perforated grained ebony leather or the ebony Luxtech upholstery we've been trying here, which features a rich suede cloth finish. Either way, there's 12-way power adjustability at the front, plus you get an auto-dimming rear view mirror. The move from standard to S grade also gets you a big step up in media connectivity. That includes a very good GPS setup, Land Rover's Connected Navigation Pro system. This incorporates a Connect Pro pack, which gives you the brand's range of pro services, which update you on traffic congestion, add satellite and street level imagery to the GPS system, give you an online search function for journeying information, and allow door-to-door routing, via which navigation to a set address continues on your smartphone, so that after you park, you're guided to the very door of your destination. Also included from S level up in the range is an online pack, which allows you to create in your Discovery Sport a mobile 4G Wi-Fi hotspot for up to 8 electronic devices, and it includes the brand's super clever smart settings system, which uses artificial intelligence algorithms to learn your driving preferences, things like seat positions plus music and climate settings, and they adjust themselves as you approach the car. All of that comes on an S-Spec Evoque. As mentioned earlier though, you'll need to stretch at least as far as the mid-range SE trim, which, as we said earlier, is what we have here. If you want this car's cabin in its most sophisticated form, complete with the fully digital interactive driver display that replaces the conventional instrument binnacle dials. SE Spec also gets you larger 19-inch wheels, scrolling front animated directional indicators, a powered tailgate and premium headlamps with auto high beam assist and signature daytime running lights. There is also a blind spot assist system and memory settings for the powered front seats. The final step in the trim hierarchy is HSE. Such variants are recognisable by the gloss sparkle silver 5 split spoke finish applied to their 20-inch wheel rims. Inside, HSE models stand apart too, thanks to the inclusion of softer, smarter Windsor leather upholstery and illuminated tread plates. At this level in the range, you also get keyless entry, an upgraded Meridian sound system, 14-way front seat adjustability, and the clever ClearSight interior rearview mirror, which sees the rearview camera act like a rearview mirror if your view via the normal physical item is obscured, say by rear passengers or by cargo area luggage. There's also a drive pack that gives you adaptive cruise control. Plus, it builds on the standard autonomous braking functionality. Now we're going to get onto that in a moment, with a high-speed emergency braking system. On to options, and as you might expect from a premium brand, there's a vast selection of extras for potential buyers to choose from. Let's bring a few key ones to your attention. You might want the head-up display and the wireless charging mat, and if your Discovery Sport doesn't already feature these, the ClearSight virtual rearview mirror and the interactive driver display digital instrument cluster. Now all those items can be ordered separately, or they can be all bundled together as part of an optional technology pack. If you're into lifestyle activities, we would also recommend the optional activity key. That's a waterproof, shockproof wristband with an integrated transponder. Now, when you're wearing it, you can lock the key into the car and remove the anxiety of losing it. When you return from rock climbing or canoeing or biking or whatever you do, all you have to do is hold the wristband near to the boot badge and it opens the tailgate so you can access the ordinary key fob where you'll have safely stored it away. The activity key doesn't have a battery, so it'll never run out of power. As for driving stuff, well, Land Rover's offering its Adaptive Dynamics variable damping system, which allows you to alter suspension feel. This setup uses sensors which analyse body movement 100 times a second and wheel movement 500 times a second, ensuring that the damping should always be perfectly suited to the way that you want to drive. It works through the various modes of the Terrain Response 2 driving mode system that we mentioned earlier, and it can, at extra cost, be embellished with a further configurable dynamics mode, which will allow you to set up specific personal preferences with regards to throttle, steering and suspension feel. For those who are more interested in off-road dynamics, well, we would then recommend the wade sensing feature. Now that will show your current fording depth on the center dash monitor. To get wade sensing, you have to have specified the 360-degree surround view camera package, a setup which includes the clever ground sight clear view forward camera system we've been trying here in this car, offering a virtual 180-degree view and very handy when you're off-roading or parking in tight spaces. What else? Well, across the range, you might be tempted by a range of optional luxury features, perhaps a cabin air ionisation package with an air quality sensor, privacy glass or configurable ambient lighting. Plus, you might like to consider one of the 2 Meridian audio system upgrades. There's a 10-speaker package or a 14-speaker surround sound setup. Now, curiously, front fog lights cost extra on all models, as does a headlamp power wash, and you can upgrade the LED headlights with matrix technology, which will allow them to adapt elements of their beam to road conditions and other vehicles. You might also want a solar attenuating windscreen, a TV tuner, keyless entry, a tracking system in case of theft, and the fixed panoramic glass roof that we have here. You can add a temperature control screen for second row passengers, and extra cooling vents are available for the third row seats. And beyond that, well, if we were buying, there are a few things that we might want to put aside a little extra budget for. Bear in mind that a space saver spare wheel costs extra, so you'll have to budget for that if in the event of a puncture you don't want to be stuck by the side of the road fiddling with one of those irritating tyre inflation kits. Other practical features you might want to specify include a load space partition net and load space storage rails with a luggage retention kit. As part of an optional convenience pack, both those last two features can be had packaged up with the activity key we mentioned earlier, and if your Discovery Sport doesn't already have one of these, a powered tailgate. You can add in a modular click and go system for the rear of the front seats, onto which can be clipped hooks, hangers, tray tables or tablet mounts. For the load area, there's a load space organiser, there's a collapsible luggage organiser and a tailgate seat. You can have a centre armrest, cooler warmer box, and there's a smoker's pack too, which is available if you haven't kicked the habit. For those with dogs, there are a range of pet pack accessories too, which include a quilted load space liner, a full height luggage partition, and even a spill resistant water bowl and a portable rinse system. Roof crossbars will allow you to specify a roof box, a roof bike carrier and carriers for skis and snowboards. In addition, many owners will want the electrically deployable tow bar to be fitted, or a simpler detachable one, in which case your dealer will also want to tell you about the advanced tow assist technology that you can have that'll help you when you're hitched up and trying to park a trailer. Now with this setup, images from the rear-facing camera are relayed to the central touchscreen and the driver can manoeuvre using the Terrain Response 2 system's rotary controller. The advanced tow assist system will then autonomously steer the trailer into place. All that the driver has to do is to operate the accelerator and the brake pedals. Manoeuvring without a trailer can be made easier if you specify the optional park pack, which will give you a 360-degree parking aid and a park assist system to steer you into awkward spaces. Onto aesthetics. Now wheel rim sizes are often key for Discovery Sport buyers, so there's a wider than usual range of different alloy designs on offer in sizes from 17 to 21 inches. This particular car's 20-inch 5 split spoke gloss dark grey diamond turned rims are particularly nice. Whatever your rim choice, don't forget to add in locking wheel nuts, perhaps even red brake calipers too. Buyers wanting the 5-seat cabin configuration will be offered an optional 21-inch wheel pack, which packages up the largest rims with Adaptive Dynamics adaptive damping. We mentioned that system earlier. Onto paintwork. Now bear in mind, unless you want your car finished in solid Narvik black, which is what we have here, or Fuji white, you'll have to pay extra for one of the metallic finishes. There are 7 shades on offer as part of what Land Rover calls a more grown-up palette, plus 3 further premium metallic hues of Carpathian grey, silicon silver, or if you're a little more extrovert, Namib orange. A black contrast coloured roof option is available too, if that's not already your car's primary colour, of course. Particularly popular amongst Discovery Sport buyers is the optional black exterior pack, which gives the car a meaner look by adding gloss black finishing to the front grille, the rear number plate surround, the mirror caps, the front and rear lower bumpers, and the bonnet and tailgate script. Elsewhere on the options list, you can also have chromed mirror covers, black body side mouldings, and if you like the old style SUV kind of look, fixed side steps and bright side tubes. For the interior, you could add chromed or illuminated tread plates, plus there are optional inlays available in either titanium mesh or 2 types of oak veneer, gloss charcoal and natural shadow. There's also an optional ebony headliner. You might additionally want to look at premium carpet mats, plus bright metal pedals and either black, red or aluminium gear shift paddles. You could be interested in spending a bit of extra money on the front seats too. Depending on the spec that you've chosen, those can be upgraded with 12 or 14-way powered adjustment, plus the chairs can be specified with cooling and massaging functions too. As mentioned earlier, nearly all models get leather upholstery, but you can upgrade that to softer perforated Windsor leather You could spend a bit of extra cash on the steering wheel too. You could get it heated, or you could trim it in suede cloth. On to safety, where, as you'd expect, most of the main bases are covered. There are 7 airbags, including the usual twin front, side and curtain ones. Plus, other expected passive safety features include ISOFIX rear child seat fastenings, anti-whiplash head restraints, tyre pressure monitoring, and the usual electronic assistance for traction and stability control. As usual, there's ABS braking with emergency brake assist to aid in panic stops, and those are advertised to following motorists by automatically activating hazard flashers. What else? Well, Discovery Sport occupants are surrounded by a high-strength steel safety cell, and the reactions of the person in charge at the wheel will constantly be overseen by a standard driver condition monitor, and that's to search for signs of drowsiness. As for driving aids, well, Hill Start Assist stops the car from drifting backwards on uphill junctions. There is engine drag torque control to reduce the chance of a kind of wheel lockup that might be caused by strong engine braking in slippery conditions. Cornering brake control varies braking force to each wheel to avoid unsettling the car too much if you're unwise enough to brake at speed in the middle of a corner. And roll stability control that is integrated into the standard dynamic stability control system to reduce the possibility of a rollover during extreme turns at speed. Plus, if you fitted a tow bar, you'll benefit from trailer stability assist, which mitigates against trailer sway. All well and good, but what about the kind of clever camera-driven safety features that increasingly appear in all this model's main rivals? Well, of course, this Discovery Sport has those too. Fitted as standard across the range is an emergency braking system that scans the road ahead as you drive in search of potential collision hazards, whether they be vehicles or pedestrians. If such a thing is detected, you'll be warned. If you don't respond, or well, perhaps you aren't able to, then braking will automatically be applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident. In addition, all Discovery Sport models get a lane keeping assist system, which will alert dozy drivers if they're veering out of the lanes on the highway. Plus, we particularly approve of the optimized assistance SOS emergency call feature, which is built into the standard remote app package. Now that transmits your location and your diagnostic data to the emergency services in the event of an accident. That could be a lifesaver. By and large, what you get on top of the features we've already mentioned will depend on the spec level that you choose. Now, as I mentioned earlier, S-Spec adds traffic sign recognition, while SE-Spec adds blind spot assist. HSE adds high-speed emergency braking and an adaptive cruise control with Q-Assist package. Now, the Q-Assist element of that is a feature that you can set in a traffic jam so that the car can handle irritating, very low-speed stop-start motoring without driver intervention. As for safety options, well, your dealer will offer you a drive pack, which adds blind spot assist, adaptive cruise control and high-speed emergency braking. That's if your Discovery Sport doesn't already have those features, of course. Or you can go further by specifying a more complete driver assist pack, which, along with the drive pack stuff that I just mentioned, gives you the 360-degree surround camera system, wade sensing and all the various park pack features that we referenced earlier. The key stat that you need to know here doesn't for once relate to fuel figures, emissions readings or taxation status. It's this Discovery Sport model's exemplary residual value showing. Depreciation is one of the biggest costs of running a new car, yet it's also the easiest one to forget in the excitement of model selection. This Land Rover clings onto its value with class-leading tenacity. Independent experts regularly place it amongst the top 5 best residual value performers on the market. And amongst those top 5 best performers, industry experts' glasses reckon that a Discovery Sport would be the fastest selling used car of the lot. A typical model would be likely to be in a dealer's hands for no more than around 30 days before being snapped up, and that's at least half as long as normal. You don't really get much of a feel for the used market demand for this car merely by looking at percentage depreciation stats, but we'll give them to you anyway. Expect a 41 to 51% retained value from new after 3 years. The variance depends on how you specify your car, which is why the PCP finance quotations for this car are so relatively affordable. All of this is just as well because it partly compensates for some of the issues that Land Rover has when it comes to the more usual running cost parameters. Let's get to the key one. You might, like us, find it a little difficult to get your head around the fact that this improved Discovery Sport weighs significantly more than the Range Rover brand's much larger Velar model, a car that's a substantial 200 mils longer. That anomaly was easy to understand with the older version of this design, which was saddled with the old Ford-derived D8 steel platform, which dates way back to the Freelanders at the turn of the century. This improved model, though, gets a much trumpeted premium transverse architecture platform instead, and you'd think that would be lighter and much more sophisticated, but it's still fashioned from clunky old steel. The aluminium underpinnings, which undergird the larger full-fat Discovery model, were deemed to be too expensive for this one, which is difficult to understand given that the Jaguar Land Rover conglomerate does offer an aluminium chassis in another of its more compact SUVs, the Jaguar F-Pace. The reason that we're making such an issue of that is because of the contribution all this makes to this Land Rover's unwanted status as easily the heaviest mid-sized SUV in the class. Top versions tip the scales at well over 2 tons, which is the most direct reason why this model line's fuel and efficiency readings can't match those of the competition, despite this post-2020 model year Discovery Sport's introduction of 48-volt MHEV mild hybrid engine technology, which recovers braking energy and then uses it during low-speed driving and to boost performance when you're accelerating. The system enhances the usual stop-start feature by cutting the engine when you're rolling below 11 miles an hour, saving further fuel, although when you accelerate and the engine cuts back in, it does so with rather a jolt. Overall, Land Rover claims that the mild hybrid tech gives a 6% fuel economy improvement and it cuts CO2 by 8%, but it's not really enough to salvage a really class competitive set of fuel and CO2 readings. To give you some perspective on that, let's tell you that the D180 diesel Discovery Sport variant, the most customers tend to choose, manages up to 39.6 mpg on the WLTP combined cycle and up to 150 grams per kilometre of NEDC rated CO2. To give you some segment perspective on that, a comparably performing direct rival like the Mercedes GLB 220d 4MATIC, which doesn't bother with mild hybrid tech, manages up to 47.9 mpg and up to 135 grams per kilometre. To be fair to Land Rover, the GLB, like every other direct rival in the sector, is not as capable off-road as a Discovery Sport. You'll just have to decide for yourself how compensatory a factor that is for you. You don't gain much in efficiency terms by choosing a cheaper diesel Discovery Sport model. The D150 mild hybrid all-wheel drive auto variant manages up to 40 miles per gallon and 147 grams per kilometre. And the non-mild hybrid front-driven manual D150 manages 47.8 mpg and 140 grams per kilometre, which, somewhat ironically, makes that old tech derivative by far the cleanest and most efficient derivative in the range. For completion, let's tell you too that the top D240 diesel we're trying here returns up to 38.8 mpg and up to 168 grams per kilometre. In this test, we've been averaging a mid-30s mpg figure and getting around 300 miles from the now larger 67-litre fuel tank, which usefully is 20% larger with this revised model. Going forward, all the diesel engines will, of course, now meet the current officially stipulated need for RDE2, Real Driving Emissions Stage 2, Euro Emissions Compliancy. The mild hybrid petrol versions are some way off the diesel readings, of course. A P200 model manages up to 30.2 mpg and 179 grams per kilometre, while for the P250 it's 29.9 mpg and 182 grams per kilometre. If you're set on fueling from the green pump, then we would recommend the PHEV plug-in hybrid petrol derivative as a much better alternative. This mates a 3-cylinder 1.5 litre petrol unit, putting out 197 HP with a 107 horsepower electric motor. Whichever fuel type you prefer, you'll get a range of engineering tweaks which offer a further bit of efficiency assistance. For instance, the way that the all-wheel drive system's driveline disconnect setup disengages drive to the rear wheels when you're cruising to reduce frictional losses before they seamlessly re-engage in a fraction of a second when conditions dictate. Then there are updates to the Z-Off Auto gearbox, which apparently offer a 2% fuel economy improvement, and Land Rover says that this enhanced model is slightly more aerodynamic thanks to changes made to the front bumper and to the engine under tray, plus the addition of active vanes on the air intakes. You'll want to be taxation friendly with your choice of Discovery Sport variant, which might be difficult, not only because of the emissions figures that we've just given you, but also because you're likely to find it extremely hard to get the kind of driveline and spec package that you want for a list price of under £40,000. Over that figure, you'll be liable for the government's £320 annual VED surcharge in years 2 to 6 of ownership. Below £40,000, the CO2 weighted first year road tax payment will be £205. That's normally rolled into the on the road price, followed by the standard £135 a year. In terms of benefit in kind taxation payments, the base D150 manual non-hybrid variant is rated at 32%. Otherwise, all Discovery Sport models fall into the maximum 37% band. All of the fuel and CO2 figures we quoted earlier assume that you've chosen the most frugal of the 4 terrain response 2 driving modes, Eco, for your trip. That's a setting that, as the name suggests, adjusts all of the car's systems for maximum efficiency. Beyond that, your driving is clearly going to play a crucial part in the efficiency process, and that's something that this Discovery Sports technology wants to help you to improve. The Touch Pro infotainment screen's Eco data section offers a driving style display to help here, and that shows you your recent efficiency success when it comes to 3 areas: accelerator, speed and engine, and brake. There's also a history screen which graphically shows how your running cost figures from recent journeys have stacked up, and rather cringingly, it awards you a little trophy for the most frugal one. You also get an energy impact screen option, and that shows the effect on efficiency of the climate system, the heated rear window, the heated windscreen and the heated seats. There's also an eco tips section that you can select for driving advice, which personally I think we'd avoid because most of the advice is pretty obvious. Things like avoid driving at high speeds and select the highest possible gear. As for engine technology, well, the diesel engines, like the units you'll find in every rival, use AdBlue, a urea-based liquid that's squirted into the hot exhaust to neutralise many of the harmful gases that would otherwise be blown into the surrounding atmosphere. The AdBlue tank, which is now 25% larger, will need to be filled up regularly, although it can last up to 9,000 miles, and your Land Rover dealer will charge you around £30 to fill it up. If you've taken out one of the brand's service plans, though, those top-ups are included for free. We would suggest you consider one of those plans, a prepaid servicing package for 5 years or 50,000 miles, whichever comes first. On a Discovery Sport costs around £500, which is decent value. You can transfer it to future owners too. Service intervals are every year or every 16,000 miles. A lot of Discovery Sport buyers will fund their car through a lease deal, and Land Rover offers its own finance for this. Most of these packages include the cost of insurance, but if you buy the car with your own money and decide to arrange cover yourself, you'll want to know which group the car will sit in. Now, the lowest powered petrol and diesel models, they start in Group 24. The ratings then climb up to Group 40, depending on engine and trim. The D240 SE diesel variant that we have here is rated at Group 33. That's a chunk above the ratings that apply to some directly comparable rivals. And that only leaves the warranty, an unremarkable 3-year unlimited mileage deal that mirrors what you get on a rival Mercedes GLB and is better than you get from brands like Volkswagen, Audi and Lexus in this segment. They limit their 3-year cover to 60,000 miles. There is also an in-control protect service which allows you to monitor vital stats on your car from your smartphone, and it will guide the breakdown services to your Discovery Sport's location should it ever have a problem. Also included is 3 years of European cover and a promise to get you on your way as soon as possible in your own car or in a loaned vehicle if the required repair will take longer than 4 hours. Embracing the adventurous spirit that has defined the Discovery family for the past 30 years, this enhanced Discovery Sport is a car that we found to be a useful evolution from the original. For years, it's been the market's only premium badged 7-seat mid-sized SUV. The arrival of the Mercedes GLB gives Solihull some much needed competition on that score, but otherwise, if you want a car like this, your only other choices lie either with a 5-seat mid-sized model or a volume branded 7-seat SUV in this category that won't have this car's upmarket feel or its strong residual values. It's true that some rivals offer a more engaging tarmac driving experience, but the Discovery Sport's greater emphasis on luxury and comfort is one that we believe most likely buyers will prefer. We think the ride quality is class leading. Now sure, you do pay for that, especially if you delve into the extensive options list, but this car's value proposition remains appealing in terms of its monthly finance figures, and that's thanks to an excellent set of residual value predictions. Which is just as well, because running cost efficiency is not a particular strong point by class standards. The new mild hybrid engines are hobbled by this car's rather prodigious curb weight and by an auto gearbox that's too often either sluggish or slightly erratic when you need it to be quick-witted. These issues aren't serious enough to be game changers though if, as is quite possible, you really like what Land Rover's created here. The lovely cabin with its smarter displays, the clever tech like the clear sight ground view and rear view mirror screens. All of those are compelling reasons why you might want a Discovery Sport. And in many ways, it remains the class of the field. And talking of fields, this car still traverses them far better than any rival. Of more interest to likely buyers though will be the fact that it's also the best tow car in the segment. In short, if you wanted one of these before, you'll want it even more now. And if you didn't, it really might be worth taking another look. Above and beyond was the objective in redeveloping this model. And considering the end result, you have to say that mission's been accomplished.